Jackson Larimer. You are a financial coach who went from corporate to entrepreneur, renter to real estate investor, and now with your podcast, Money with Jackson, you've interviewed dozens of millionaires. You've become an expert on what makes a millionaire. Thank you for being here today. I'm glad to be able to have you. And in your experience, what is the real bottleneck for most people? Is it a lack of income, spending behavior, or something else?
I'm going to throw you a curveball here. I think for most people, the bottleneck is actually more the emotional side of money. So when you look at like what makes people financially successful, there's really three factors. It's how well can you make money, how well can you manage money, and then how do your emotions impact the financial decisions that you make. The people that are the most financially successful, in my perspective, are the ones that are very intentional with how they spend their money. They're very intentional with the investments that they make, and they don't let their emotions get in the way of making good financial choices. So that can manifest in so many different ways, right? Like on the expense side of things, a lot of times, it's interesting because in America, we're always surrounded by marketing. And I think I read a stat somewhere that it's like the average person sees over 400 advertisements in a single day, just, on your computer, ads.
I hate that, but I believe it.
The side of the road. And so it's really easy. And, I've fallen into this trap myself in the past too, is like just going through life and letting someone else dictate what you want your life to look like. And so if you think about financial success, even beyond just a number, it's being very intentional about how you're using your money to create the life that you want to have. And that's where I see like the X factor is people that have a clear vision of where they want to go, and they know the income that they need to get there. They know how to manage their expenses, and they know how to make wise investment decisions along the way.
So you'd say it's not necessarily the plus or the minus, the income or the spending, but more the why behind it, the emotion and the decision making there. So since you bring up the emotional piece, how would you say that relates to risk and clients' risk tolerance or their relationship with accepting risk in their life?
Oh man, that's a great one. One thing I've noticed in my practice is that a lot of times our willingness to take risk has to do with how we were raised. And I really break it down into two categories. So I call it the reactionary and the adoptive mindset. So for example, I have, clients I work with that they were raised in a household where income was very unstable, financially it was unstable. And because of that, they adopt a reactionary mindset where it's like, I know what it was like to be stressed about money. I never want to go to that place again of not knowing whether we're going to get kicked out of our house or, whatever it might be, those feelings of fear that you had in your childhood. And their reactionary mindset, it's like they go too far in the opposite direction where now they're risk averse. They're not willing to take risks that would actually put them ahead financially. They're trying to save every penny, cutting expenses when they don't need to, and they could potentially make their life easier by spending more money. So that's what I call the reactionary mindset. And then there's also the adoptive mindset. And this is where you like the way you were raised and you're trying to emulate what either your parents or another mentor showed you was possible.
So you're bringing up the way somebody's raised, and you've talked to at least dozens, maybe hundreds, I don't know, at least between your practice and your podcast, potentially hundreds of people who have things to discuss with money, which is a poor way to say that. But millionaires and the like, they have money problems or money goals. And all of that, I think, comes from like someone's relationship with money does start early. And I, as you were talking about like someone who doesn't know if they're going to get kicked out of their house, like my best friend, I'm not going to say he's paid more phone bills than his mom, but growing up as a teenager, like, his phone was always getting shut off. He had a little side job, like pulling weeds or mowing lawns or whatever. And he was paying for the phone bill for his family. And, like even in my own life, like I have helped out with certain bills growing up because of, financial decisions that my parents made or didn't make, which, caused circumstances. And so like, I get having money problems. And I get that my friends and family have had money problems. But with you, now you are a financial coach. And I had a similar desire at one point where like I want to be a financial advisor or a coach because I want to help people. I want to help people not have these problems that I've experienced to a degree. Not that I like grew up in poverty. So many people have it much worse. Not trying to say that. But how has your relationship with money changed from when you grew up to now?
Oh man, it's changed a lot. And I'll share a little bit of my background that I think will help answer this question of how my relationship with money has changed. So I would say I lean more towards that adoptive mindset where my
Mm-hmm.
parents set a really good financial example for me. They were
Mm-hmm.
always great stewards of their money, grew up in a Christian household. And the first lesson I ever learned about money was when I got paid $10 to mow the lawn. And my dad would, give me a $5 bill and 5 ones and say, okay, here's $9 for you and $1 we're bringing with us to church on Sunday. And
Mm-hmm.
that's going to be your donation. So they gave me a lot of great lessons that have really helped. When I was growing up, my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and my dad worked in insurance, still does
Mm-hmm.
to this day. Always a W-2 job. Provided a great living for us, but coming out of high school, I just believed that the only path forward was to work for someone else. Like it had never even really crossed my mind that you could do your own thing because I had just
Right.
never seen that.
Yeah.
And I served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So out of high school, I moved down to Guatemala, there for 2 years. And it's my first time living overseas, my first time living away from home. I realized that not every place is like America,
Mm.
where in America, and you could argue it's maybe shrinking these days, but we have a middle class where there's some social mobility. You can go from being raised in poverty to being extremely wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
In Guatemala, that's not the case. There's, people that are living in huts with dirt floors, and you go 1 block down the street and they're like high-rise apartments and, like BMW dealerships.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just like crazy seeing that contrast that it's like, depending on where you're born, you're either going to be really wealthy or you're going to be living in poverty for the rest of your
Mm-hmm.
life. And I think that was what really inspired me to want to help people and show them like, man, what a great opportunity we have living in this country where you can truly change your future.
Yeah.
So fast forward a little bit, I get back to the United States, I start going to college. I have no money and I needed to pay for college. So I took a job in door-to-door sales. And this was really the first time that it opened my eyes to a different way of providing for myself. It's a 100% commission job.
Mm-hmm.
It was definitely the biggest financial risk I'd ever taken. I think I had like maybe $800 to my name, enough to, maybe pay for groceries. But it was really like a sink or swim. It was like either I have to figure out how to sell pest control or I'm going to go home empty handed and there's no in between. And I rose to the challenge. I ended up doing it for 3 years, did really well, and it helped me graduate college debt free and have a lot of savings and investments in addition to that.
Mm-hmm.
And because of this space I was in, working in, commission only sales, I started getting exposed to different ideas about money. I had a lot of people around me that were using their earnings from their commissions to buy real estate and invest in real estate. And so it was like kind of triggered like this exploration for me of like, okay, maybe working for someone else isn't the only path out there. And what do those other paths look like?
Mm.
And obviously now, I'm an entrepreneur myself. My wife is an
Yeah.
entrepreneur as well. She has a violin studio that she runs. And I absolutely love it. I feel like I, kind of found my tribe, so to speak. So to get back to your question, the biggest perspective change for me is just expanding my horizons, realizing what's possible, and realizing you don't have to take the traditional path to be financially successful.
Mm-hmm. So you've chosen, and I'll get more into like your kind of three, I don't know if you say 3 pillars, but I know you've talked about like 3 paths to becoming a millionaire, and we'll get more into that in a second. But real quick on the emotional piece here and the psychological piece, your relationship with money went from, as a child, W-2 was the only thing you knew because that's the example that you had. Now as an adult, not only you, but also your wife are both entrepreneurs. And now you're, not just married, but a father. And so once again, how did your relationship with money change, or your relationship with risk tolerance change once you became a father? Or what did anything shift there financially?
Yeah. Thank you for asking. So, maybe to kind of continue the story here and how my relationship changed when I became a father. When I graduated college, I was working in tech sales. So I kind of transitioned from door-to-door sales to tech sales.
Mm-hmm.
I was miserable. Like that's just the short of it. I was
Yeah.
doing well, but I was miserable. And I wanted to create a bigger impact that was, I wanted to feel like I was making a difference in people's
Mm-hmm.
lives. When my son was born was actually when I quit my job. And so I
Did you
guess you
have
could say
paternity leave, or like did you leave during paternity leave?
I had 2 months of paternity leave, and I let my boss know. I said, hey, I'm working on creating something for myself. I might not come back. And he said, that's fine. Here's a couple projects. Just finish these out for us and we'll
Mm-hmm.
leave on good terms. I was like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
that's awesome. Thank you for supporting me in that. So I had 2 months of paternity leave, and I was like, okay, let's go. Let's make
Yeah.
this happen. And that was where my financial coaching practice was born. When I quit my job, I had 2 people that I had helped for free and one person that had paid me $100. So I went from, making 6 figures. I was making 90,000 salary plus commissions on top
Right.
of that.
Some
So
bonuses there.
yeah, went from making basically 6 figures to zero
Mm-hmm.
overnight. And it's interesting. So I guess you could say my relationship with risk actually increased. And it was because I realized I have this kid that I love more than anything in my whole life. And he's only going to be with me for 18 years.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be the dad that's there to support him. And what's
Yeah.
the way that I can do that? Well, probably working for myself is going to give
Mm-hmm.
me that flexibility that I need to be the best dad that I can be.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I'm also a father. I've got 2 kids, a 3-year-old girl and a 9-month-old son. And I work from home. I'm in my basement right now, and they're just upstairs. And I still feel like I don't spend enough time with my kids. It's crazy. Just becoming a dad, you feel like I need to be, and maybe just like the millennial dads that we are, or maybe Gen Z. I don't know how old you are. I'm like right on the cusp of being a millennial. But maybe it's just like the young dads that we are growing up these days, where we want to spend more time with our family. But I feel like my relationship with money has maybe even changed in the opposite direction, where I have thought like, well, now it's not just my wife and I. We're like, we've never moved in with either one of our parents, but we could. Everybody could just go back. Like as long as your relationship's good, you can move back in with your parents or their parents. But now that we have a kid, like I have maybe even become more risk averse, where I'm like,
Mm.
well, I would like an even bigger emergency fund. I'm not going to leave my job until I know I'm ready, with some entrepreneurial thing, because I have a family to support and, bills to pay and mouths to feed. And so I would like an even more secure runway, or like financial runway before leaving something. So I was just curious, one father to another, what's your relationship been like once you became a father? So I appreciate that. Thanks for sharing that.
Sir, one more thing I can add to that real quick.
Yeah.
Um, Probably sounds counterintuitive that my willingness to take risks has increased with the family, because I think most people probably experience more of your
Yeah.
experience. A huge part of that is my faith in my Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ. Like, if I didn't feel like this was the path they wanted me to take, I wouldn't be on the road. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think even more than, what I see on my personal balance sheet is just that firm belief that I'm moving the direction I'm supposed to be, and it has to do
Mm-hmm.
with God's plan for me. I think, like, man, I'd be willing to run through a brick wall to do that.
Like we'll either be taken care of or we'll be destitute, but either way, that's the plan. Like that's
Yeah,
that's what was meant to
exactly.
be.
It's
So
like,
it's fine.
this is where God wants me to be, so I'll go
Yeah.
where you want me to go, so to speak.
Yeah. And a couple more thoughts too on like the mindset, like where people either like got the scarcity or abundance mindset in with their relationship to money. Sorry, this morning I'm having a hard time speaking, stumbling over my words a lot. Um, But as people think about their relationship to money, like the biggest determinant from a couple studies that I've seen, the biggest determinant of someone becoming financially successful is not whether or not their parents were rich or entrepreneurs or anything. It's just the zip code that they live in. It's literally
Mm.
just the people around you are what will influence you to become financially successful or not. And it kind of reminded me as well of like growing up, not in poverty, but growing up wanting a little bit relative to those who maybe, I guess we all want, but they had their financial needs met a little bit more. Poor families are more likely to raise fat children, where rich families are more likely to raise healthy, less obese children, which I think is an interesting study. Like where they have all this extra food, but they're not fat. Or like poor families don't have as much extra food, but they're more likely to end up fat as they grow into adults. And I really do think it is like the mindset that is given to us in our environment, but then the mindset that we choose as adults that will influence our financial success as well as our health and everything.
Yeah, that's a really interesting study. I hadn't heard that before, so I'm glad you shared it with me.
Oh yeah, it's crazy to hear. Like the zip code one, I thought that was a little more recent, but I thought that was crazy. Like it's really just the environment, the things that are in front of you, the things that you see. That is what you are more likely to become, regardless of who your parents are or whether or not they're wealthy or anything like that.
What's interesting that, if I was trying to explain probably why that's the case, I think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like, if you're based on if you're just trying to survive, you're not going to be thinking about, how can I grow my wealth? You're just thinking about how can I buy groceries on Friday?
Yeah.
And I think really the takeaway here, like most people listening to this probably aren't in that situation where they're worried about paying for groceries next week.
Mm-hmm.
But that same primal instinct can come up in the mind of entrepreneurs when you like make a leap to, go from a stable income to starting a business.
Mm-hmm.
It can create those same instinctual feelings of panic and survival that cause you to react differently to how you're spending your money, how you're investing your money, the risks that you are and aren't willing to take. And so the more you can be aware of that, the easier it can be to use your prefrontal cortex and kind of combat the amygdala, so to speak, and think through things logically and make good financial decisions and keep your emotions in check, even when you're going through a roller coaster in the early years.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I'm glad you bring up early years again. Let's talk about somebody in their early adulthood years. So I've seen you talk about kind of the 3 paths to becoming a millionaire. And so first I would just ask you to explain what you mean by that, the 3 paths to becoming a millionaire, and then what should somebody prioritize first? Which of those paths should they prioritize first?
Yeah, so the 3 paths to becoming a millionaire is investing in the stock market, buying real estate, and owning a business. Of course, there's other ways to get there, right? Like
Sure.
professional athletes or something, but those are by far the most common.
Mm-hmm.
Every single millionaire I've spoken with on my own podcast, you mentioned Money with Jackson, every single millionaire has built their wealth through one of those 3 paths. The easiest one to start with is investing. This is like more passive investing, right?
In the stock market, right?
You're buying stocks or, maybe it's something else, maybe it's cryptocurrency, but essentially you're using your earned income to invest in some other sort of asset that's going to be growing for you, that's more of a passive vehicle. That's by far the most accessible for most people. It's the easiest to get started with, and it's the lowest barrier to entry because you can start with $100. The other 2 paths, real estate and business ownership, those are maybe going to take a little more capital to get started. If you're trying to make a down payment on a property, or if you're trying to start a business, there's going to be more startup costs.
Right.
But very, very proven methods to growing your wealth. And actually, usually what I see, I'll show you the pattern that I see.
Yeah.
Usually people start with investing in things like stocks because it's the most accessible. Then they shift into taking more of a concentrated bet, either in, working for a startup or starting a business something where they see some equity and they see some upside potential.
Mm-hmm.
That concentrated risk is what creates wealth. And once they've created wealth, they use real estate as a way to preserve their wealth. So they're very rich. And, obviously people follow different paths, but that's the most common sequence I see is like, you get started investing, it gives you a taste for what's possible.
Mm-hmm.
Then you take some sort of concentrated risk that pays off. And then you use vehicles like real estate to preserve your wealth.
Yeah. Would you say that that's the right approach for most people? Or is that just what happens?
I think this is where you have to know yourself. Going back to the example of my parents are millionaires and they're going to have a very comfortable retirement. They've never done anything except work a W-2 job and invest in the stock market.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to be what works for them, right? I love my dad. He's a great provider, but I don't think he would be interested in starting a business.
Mm-hmm.
He just would prefer to exert more of his energy in other areas.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have on the flip side, I have a client I work with that's making over $1 million a year in his 20s because he decided to start a business.
Wow, great for him.
So the more you know yourself, the easier it's going to be to make that decision of what's right for you. Something else I think that comes into play here is understanding where you have leverage. Like, what's the skill set that you have, and what's the best way to apply that skill set that's going to create wealth?
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you one of the easiest ways. Like, if you're just trying to build wealth as fast as possible, I think the easiest and safest way, so to speak, is by identifying a skill set that you have and plugging it into another organization where there's a gap for that skill set. Because,
and you mean as a W-2 employee, plugging it into another organization?
Yeah, as a W-2 employee, or even like if you're partnering with someone, right? Like, it could be if you wanted to go more the business route, maybe like an owner-operator type of structure where you have a capital investor, someone who's a little further along that has the money to get the business going, and you're more of the operator. Understanding what your skill set is and finding a business where you could be a really good operator where you're building equity over time. So it doesn't have to be a W-2 job. That's probably going to be the quickest way, is just identifying your skill set and figuring out, where's the gap in the marketplace that I could plug this in.
So thinking about some of your clients then who they've built their wealth in multiple different ways, what's some harsh advice, or maybe not harsh advice, but like a harsh truth you've had to share with somebody, or maybe you were hesitant to share? What situations have you had like that?
Oh, I might have to think for a second on this one.
And of course, there's some privacy here. Obviously, we won't share names or anything, but hey guys, real quick, if you're a YouTube creator specifically, we've just partnered with our first sponsor. We're very excited about it. It's tubeanalytics.ai. TubeAnalytics.ai is an AI-powered YouTube analytics software where you can plan videos, research your niche, see insights that YouTube Studio isn't giving you. So if you're interested in that, you can start for free at TubeAnalytics.ai. Go ahead and type that into your browser or link in the description below.
I would say, like, my approach to coaching people on their money is I try and take a neutral stance where I can let them discover for themselves the changes that they need to make, and I can lead them in that direction. But there are some times where I get a little more fired up and I'm trying to singe people's eyebrows. And the number one time that happens is when it's a husband and wife dynamic. And I see the husband controlling the money for the family. A lot of times as husbands, we don't realize that we're doing this. I'll actually give an example from my own life. When I was first married, my wife and I were coming from very different financial backgrounds. And we had very different financial situations as well. I was a little further down the financial path, so to speak, than my wife was. We decided to combine our finances together. But I was honestly concerned, because she had some student loans that now as the provider is like, okay, it's going to be my
Like, these are my
responsibility
loans
to,
now.
yeah,
Yeah.
those are my loans now that I'm going to have to pay off. And then I was bringing a decent chunk of investments to the table into our relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so because of this, at the beginning, I was very controlling with our financial resources where, she'd get home from the store and bring in all the bags, and I'm asking her like, how much did that cost? How much did this cost? And finally we had to sit down and have a conversation. And I realized that because I was trying to control everything, my wife didn't have an opportunity to grow. Right. And I was also just pissing her off, quite frankly. I had to learn how to let go and involve her more in our financial situation so that we could truly create that unity that we wanted in our marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Now things are awesome. Like,
Mm.
I mean, my wife is incredible. She has such a great sense of ownership. She started her own business with a violin studio. She totally runs that herself. Like, occasionally she'll ask me a few questions about the financial stuff, but like that's
Mm-hmm.
totally her lane. And it was really good for me to be able to kind of surrender and let go of like, I trust my wife to make great financial decisions. And a lot of times now she's the one bringing me in check.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to foster that trust has been powerful. As far as like, your question here of what are some of the harsh truths?
Mm-hmm.
I think the harsh truths for husbands is that we think because we have more financial knowledge, we're going to be better at managing the money for our family. And that's usually not the case.
Mm.
Even if your wife is, a stay-at-home mom and has never, done anything financially or entrepreneurial related in her life, she still has values and opinions and perspectives that matter. And as a provider, it's your responsibility to help fill in the knowledge gaps,
Mm-hmm.
not to judge or criticize, but to be like, okay, I can't have a conversation with you about investing in real estate because you don't understand the language of money.
Mm-hmm.
Let me help you understand so that we can make these decisions together.
Yeah. What you just said, as a married man, similar situation of like, my wife's not, she's kind of an entrepreneur. She makes bread and sells that on the weekends at a little, porch bakery. And that's kind of fun. She's not trying to turn it into like a 6-figure business or anything like that. So she is an entrepreneur in that way. But I have more of the entrepreneurial spirit, and I'm also the sole provider, mostly, aside from like the bread. But sole provider for our household, couple kids, very similar situation. It sounds like, where I feel, and many other dads and men are in this similar boat. And of course, there's also plenty of households where both spouses work. But all that to be said, I feel like as men, we're often the one who earns more or is the sole earner, just because of the jobs that we take and the way society is. And so we may feel like we should have more of the decision-making power. And we may exercise a little bit of that control, either explicitly, where you say, how much did that cost? Or implicitly, where you're like, wow, that cost so much money. And like through comments that you make. I've been married a little over 8 years. And the entire time, my wife has made comments like, yeah, I was afraid to buy that because I didn't want you to get mad at me for spending too much money. That has happened 0 times. And I don't know if that's a belief that, like, she grew up with, that like spending money was bad, even though her parents have, her dad's made plenty of money as well, through a W-2 income. So I don't know where the belief has come from, but there is a dynamic between husband and wife where like we bring in these thoughts about money and spending money, where in my mind, like I am way too loose with my wallet. And I'm of the opinion that like, it's just money. We'll get more of it. Like there's always going to be more money, like not a big deal. We will just find a way to get more money. That's been my attitude, where her attitude has been more of like, savings conscious. And so we've had several conversations over the years as well. It was like, hey, it's okay if you want to spend some money for yourself, or like get the nice brand of pasta noodles instead of the Great Value, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Like, which by the way is so worth it sometimes. Like we made these like really nice grilled cheeses once, like artisan bread, really nice deli cheeses. Like you can feel like a baller and still be on a budget. Like we spent $15 on grilled cheeses instead of $2, and it was incredible. Anyway, there's little ways to like splurge with your money without breaking the bank. But all that to be said of like, as men, I feel like we're in the business world, we're in the corporate world or whatever. Like we feel like we're smarter with money when that's not really the case. It's often like in the corporate world, the CEO is removed from the day-to-day operations of the household or of the business. And in that way, the men are often removed from the day-to-day operations of our household where we're out earning an income or, whether you work from home or not. Most of your time is focused on working either for yourself or a business. And your wife is the one who is running the household, taking care of the kids, doing the shopping, managing the house, and including taking the kids to like gymnastics or whatever. And there's a cost associated with that. Your wife is more aware of that than you are. And I feel like as men, we often need to take a step back and let our wives have more freedom and control and decision making. And sometimes that needs to be said as well, because we can't just take a step back and not say anything. We need to verbally make sure that they understand that like, hey, I appreciate that you're doing this and I want you to feel like you can make these decisions on your own. You don't have to consult me about this. I trust you to make these good decisions. That's more of a personal belief of mine and maybe not the right way for everybody. But that's something that I found in my relationship and my relationship with money as well.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't know if that was the direction you wanted to go in.
No, I think I think that was great.
It's just interesting because, like, I work with a lot of married couples, and there are some situations where, the wife is the earner and maybe the husband's more of the caregiver.
Yeah.
But the most common one, maybe it's just because I'm a man, but the most common one I see is where the husband has the higher level of financial education and they don't even realize they're projecting that sense of judgment onto their spouse, where she feels like if she asks a question, he's going to think that she's dumb for asking it. Or, she feels like she doesn't have the freedom to make those financial decisions that she wants to.
Yeah.
Or she has things that are very important to her that she would like to use the money on, but she's suppressing her own desires for the good of the family or, to try and be a supporting, wife and mother. And so I feel like that's probably one of the areas of finance I feel the most strongly about is as husbands, we need to foster that environment where we can give our wives the confidence to express those things to us without that fear of judgment and really be able to start to create that sense of equality in the marriage.
Yeah. And I don't think, I'll overshare a little bit again. I don't think that my wife has ever felt scared of asking a question. Like I have a finance degree. Like I generally understand money and investing and things like that. I also have a master's degree, master's of business administration. So like I generally get it as far as finance and analytical stuff goes. And my wife has a psychology degree. Like, I guess we're a little stereotypical that way. I don't think she's ever felt scared of asking a question, which I appreciate and I'm a little proud of there. But she has definitely felt scared of spending money, which I've never intended to make her feel that way, which means that either she's brought something in or I have created a situation where by my actions or words that I have said, I've unintentionally made my wife feel uncomfortable bringing up questions about her spending money on herself or for the kids or buying something, which I think as men is something that we need to work on of like things that we unknowingly or unintentionally do. And especially in our own relationships, I think that's even more important to be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, well, you're a financial coach. So you work one-on-one with individuals, families, couples, and whoever is needing assistance or has goals that they're trying to work towards. But you're also a content creator, just like everybody else these days. And I don't mean that as a dig, but it's like everybody has some form of like, whether it's LinkedIn posts or videos or something, like there's so many of us putting stuff out into the world, which I think is great. But kind of marrying those two niches and industries of providing financial coaching and putting out content in the finance world, it brings up what I've seen is a bit of a conflict of interest sometimes, not in your work, but with other creators online. And so with that in mind, that's kind of my belief. I've seen that. But what's something popular in money media that you actually think hurts people or that you disagree with?
Mm. Oh man, I needed to think about these questions ahead of time.
I told you I should have
Let's
sent
see.
you more of this stuff ahead of time, but we're just going.
Something in popular media that I disagree with
And you know
as
what?
far
I
as
like the way
money
you say that.
goes.
Let's go like general media and then narrow down to like specifically financial, entertainment, education. So like media broadly, like I wish things were not always displayed this way, or whatever your opinion is there. And then let's narrow down to financial content.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna go with I'll say broad media first, and actually I'm gonna lean on personal experience again here.
Okay.
So there's kind of been like this narrative going through the media in the last few years where it's this idea of like, work life harmony, and I need to prioritize my family first, and I'm entitled to a sense of flexibility, and in my financial situation,
Mm-hmm.
employers are bad. Like, let's stick it to corporate America. All of these things that are kind of coming from this same trend of like people wanting to have greater control over their lives.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a false narrative, and I think it's actually doing
Mm-hmm.
a lot of damage. This is coming from someone who's a father that my number one priority is being with my family.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's very honorable to work hard. And sometimes that means you have to work late, or
Mm.
sometimes you have to work on the weekend. Like I've worked almost every single Saturday for the last 2.5 years,
Yeah.
but that doesn't keep me from being with my son and my family. Like when I'm with them, I'm with them. When
Mm-hmm.
I'm working, I'm working. I'm trying to, really do a good job of being present in both of those spheres and both of those responsibilities that I have.
Mm-hmm.
The problem I see with this, popular media of, you should be able to work on your laptop by the pool, or, whatever it is, it actually just promotes more consumerism,
Mm.
where it's like the escape from overworking is the exact opposite of what leads to financial freedom, because the
Mm-hmm.
escape is spending more money on yourself, you know, doing all of these international experiences, or whatever it might be. What is that growing? Well, that's growing the automotive industry, that's growing the hotel and the entertainment industries. If you want to create financial freedom for yourself, it doesn't come from working less, and it doesn't come from trying to create this work-life harmony.
Mm-hmm.
It comes from being intentional about what you want in your life, and then actually creating a financial structure that gets you there. And here's the structure. The structure is earn more than you spend and invest the difference. And if you can do that wisely, 10 years from now, your life will look completely different than where it was before.
Mm-hmm.
And so people get the order backwards. They want the freedom now. That's not true. You have to make the sacrifices first.
Yeah.
And I see this with every single millionaire I interview. They're not buying into that crap that, like, I can just live now, live in the present. Every single one of them had to make a concentrated risk, a bet on themselves, and work incredibly hard for years to create the freedom they have now.
Mm-hmm. So real quick before we go, and I do want to hear your answer on financial content and entertainment. That reminds me, I had another question I was going to ask later, but I'll move it to now. So how do you, and I'll preface this with, 2 years ago took an international trip, spent about $8,000. Spent 3 weeks in Europe with my family, just our daughter at the time. She was almost 2. 3 weeks in Europe. It was incredible, amazing. I love that we went. I ran the numbers at that time, and it was like $250,000 basically. We spent 8,000 ish, a little over 8,000. But if I had instead invested that money and compounded over time till I was 65 or whatever my numbers were, it turned out to be I'm removing a potential $250,000 from my retirement account at age 65 or 70, whatever it was. And I ran the numbers because I'm an analytical guy and I wanted LinkedIn content, and the post performed great. So awesome. but all that to say is like, how do you balance as a father, as a financial coach, someone who's married, living in the present, going on vacations, spending money and enjoying your life right now versus sacrificing, saving, and building something for the future?
I would say my number one priority is creation over consumption, right? And so it's like, what
And
does
yeah,
that
what
mean
does
for
that
me?
mean? Yeah.
My wife and I, we set a family motto when we first got married. I have it engraved on the inside of my wedding ring, and it's creating a life we love. And
Mm-hmm.
so the financial decisions we make, we try and tie it back to that.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, what does that creation look like? Well, it means for me creating a business that I love.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to generate a positive ROI because I feel like I'm making a real contribution to the world. Obviously, it's creating income for our family. It's
Yeah.
creating good outcomes for other people. And when it comes to experiences, like that's something we prioritize as well. You know, I've
Mm-hmm.
been on some sort of international trip for the last 10 years in a row before I got married, and then once we've been married as well.
Mm.
But it comes from this place of creation rather than consumption.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like my intention behind it is to create lasting memories with my family. And I do so within our means. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, we never go into debt to go on a vacation. We try and pay ourselves first. We invest first and then spend.
Mm.
It doesn't mean that you have to live your life eating ramen noodles, never going anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to get your priorities in the right order and do things in the right order. So if you're paying yourself first and you have money left, of course,
Yeah.
I spend money on vacation, but you have to do it in the right order.
Yeah.
And I think it's worth taking a little time to think about, like, how do I want to do that? Like, is Disneyland truly what's going to be most amazing for my family? The answer is yes, go do it. But maybe not. You know, I'll give you an example. Last night, my wife and I, we went and got a couples massage. And then we went out to a restaurant that we've never been to before. As a different type of food that we tried for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
I felt just as much satisfaction doing that as I have like going on a week-long vacation with my wife before. Sometimes the week-long vacation is even more stressful.
Yo, there's plenty of vacations where I'm like, why are we here?
Yeah. But, you know, it came from every Sunday, or we try, sometimes we miss, but every Sunday night, my wife and I sit down and we plan out our week ahead of us. And one of those items that we always plan out is our date night on Fridays.
Mm-hmm.
And we're intentional about how we want to create those experiences together. And we do it with the numbers. So we're like planning out our activities and our vacations. And on the next tab over on our computer, we have our balance sheet and our expenses and our budget listed out.
Mm-hmm.
Being very intentional about how that we're spending that money so that when we come home from that trip or vacation, we feel amazing. Like it was money well spent. We don't feel stressed. Like, oh man, we went way above what maybe we should have.
Yeah. Yeah. And I totally agree that like, as long as you're intentional and you're not, I love that you say like, don't go into debt to go on a vacation. And thankfully our Europe vacation was funded by, I flip motorcycles on the side. I'm a big bike guy, as you can see, like got the plastics ripped off a sport bike there. You can't see it, but I've got an engine right behind me and some other like motorcycle decor throughout my basement here. So I've been into bikes for since 2018 is when I first bought my first motorcycle. So going on 8 years, and I made money, buying my first motorcycle, owned it for a couple years, sold it, and I made $500. I'm like, hold on, this could be like a thing. And so that turned into a side hobby where like I always just had like 4 or 5 bikes in the garage that I was just like rotating through, making the worst I ever made on a flip was $800. So like a pretty successful motorcycle flipping side business that turned into, well, now we've got all this extra cash. Not that we got rich, but plenty of extra cash to feel comfortable. Like we're still meeting our savings goals. We're still meeting our investing goals. And my sister, her husband was stationed in Europe at the time. We're like, there's a little bit of added convenience and reduced cost. We can stay a few days with them. Let's go to Europe. Like, let's do it. And it turned out to be an amazing trip. But if I hadn't have been flipping motorcycles, we never would have considered it. Like if we didn't have that extra cash and like going into debt for a vacation is just out of the equation for us. We would not do that. Not to say I've made plenty of poor financial decisions, but that will not be one of them. So I don't know. Like I said, I still feel like I don't spend enough time with my kids, even though I work from home. I could walk upstairs and see them at any point. But I love that I got to have that time, and I especially love that it didn't set us back financially in any way. Like we're still on track. And like I said, I ran the numbers, and it would have been an extra 250 grand ish in my retirement account if I had instead invested the money over 40 years. And so, you do have to look at things through that lens sometimes of like, well, this could be something else in the future, but I love that I had that time right now. And so I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I love that. And clearly you were very intentional about that. One of the questions I like to ask myself, and I think this is, kind of going back to like a scarcity versus abundance mindset.
Mm-hmm.
A scarcity mindset would be like, we can't afford this. Right. An abundance mindset is asking yourself, how can we afford this?
Mm-hmm.
And I love your example of like, you flipped a motorcycle to pay for your vacation to Europe. Clearly you were asking yourself that question of how can I afford this? And doing so in a way that was very intentional. Like you knew what the opportunity cost was, so to speak, and it was worth it to you.
You do have to be careful with that, because I will justify any expense of like, well, that's just 2 motorcycles. I could flip 2 more motorcycles. like I will find a way to spend my money.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's go back to finance content, which is often a mix of education and entertainment. Do you have any creators who you appreciate, or do you follow any finance creators? And then what's one thing in the finance content space that you think actually harms people rather than is helpful?
Yeah, I have a few creators that I really respect. One of them is Braden Shaw on Instagram.
Yeah.
I think he gives pretty sound financial advice.
Not financial advice, financial advice.
Yeah.
There's always that disclaimer of this is not financial advice.
Oh,
which is always just fun about finance content.
Yeah, the reason why that's the case is because there's a lot of compliance stuff in the background that you have to be careful with. It's a very regulated industry, but we all know it's financial advice.
Yeah. The online content for the finance industry is a legal gray area in terms of financial advice. Anyway, I'll let you keep going.
Braden Shaw, I think he does a great example of helping people get into that investor mindset. He has a lot of great content that I really respect. I also really enjoy, on more the psychological side of things, Ramit Sethi. He has a podcast called Money for Couples that I think he does a great job of exploring, some of the dynamics that we've talked about today. I also really like J.L. Collins. He's not a content creator, but he wrote a great book called The Simple Path to Wealth that I think is one of the best personal finance books out there that people can read.
Mm-hmm.
Where I see...
Was there something like life-changing or mind shift-changing in that book?
He gives you a simple framework that anyone can follow to create wealth. And, where sometimes it can feel, finance in general can feel a little overwhelming. It can feel complicated. There's a lot of jargon. He does a great job of breaking it down in a very simple way. And it's actually called The Simple Path to Wealth. So great title. He's the one that explores that idea of earn more than you spend and invest the difference. Like that's really what any financial advice boils down to. So I think it's a great framework.
Put the surplus to use.
Yeah, put the surplus to use, give every dollar a job. There's lots of different ways of saying the same idea. Where I think that financial content can be harmful is if you're not well educated financially, as in it's not your profession or you don't spend your free time researching it, it can be difficult to discern between good and bad advice. And so there's a lot of bad financial advice that people are following that they don't realize it's harming them. I'll give you a simple example.
Yeah. Let's hear an example.
So I had one of my friends came over the other day and told me, I won't mention the name of the account because I'm not trying to badmouth anyone, but told me about this financial creator that they follow. So I was like, okay, I'll go check them out. Go check out some of their videos. I filter it on YouTube by like top performing, right? Watch some of the top performing videos. One of them's like, here's the top 5 investment funds that I recommend.
Mm-hmm.
So I go watch this video and he's talking about, where you should invest your money. And the problem is that advice is just completely in a silo, right? Like it's completely ignoring different people's risk tolerances and financial situations. And it's also ignoring some underlying principles of finance. I'll give you a simple example. So have you ever heard of the Bogleheads Forum?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So Jack Bogle is founder of Vanguard and original inventor of the index fund. And so there's like this cult following called the Bogleheads. It's everyone that buys into Jack Bogle's philosophy of index fund investing. And so there's like this, it's called like the Bogleheads portfolio, right? And it has a 3-fund portfolio of how you can invest your money. It's actually quite good. So this guy comes on, he creates this video about why the Bogleheads portfolio is broken, which is fine. I love having like, counter opinions. I think that's good and it helps promote your critical thinking. The problem was he proposed an alternate portfolio that fundamentally changed the risk profile. And he's saying this portfolio is better because it generates higher returns. That may be true in the short run, over the last 10 years where we've mostly been in a bull market with the American economy. But someone that blindly sees that, invests in that portfolio is going to get a big scare when the economy takes a downturn. And so you have to understand the relationship between risk and return. How this works is that the higher return you get, usually the higher risk you have associated with that. And the lower return you get, the lower risk you have associated. And so when you're thinking about investing, you have to understand what you're trying to optimize for. Are you trying to optimize for taking bigger risks to generate a bigger return? Or are you trying to optimize for creating some stability and, more of like a preservation perspective? The interesting thing about diversification is the purpose of diversification is actually to lower your returns, but to make them more consistent. And this is maybe getting a little bit into the weeds, but there's something called sequence of returns risk. So I'll give you a very simple example here. So let's say that you have a stock that, it's $100 per share and it goes up to $200 per share after you buy it, right? So you got a 100% return on your money. And the next year, it goes down back to $100 a share. So after 2 years, you have the same amount of money that you initially invested in, right?
Okay.
Following me so far?
Yep.
If you take an average return for that portfolio, the first year it went up 100%, the next year it went down 50%. Your average return is a positive 25%. So on paper, you have a return of 25% per year, but in reality, you have the same money that you started with. Which one do I care about? Well, I care about the money in my bank account. So this is called sequence of returns risk, right? Where the nature of percentages is that when it increases, it's going to impact that average return more than when it decreases.
And hey, if you like what Jackson just said, go ahead and drop a like on the video. And now back to what Jackson was just saying.
So if I think about creating an investment portfolio for myself, and I have this one portfolio that shows, okay, average return of 25%, it has a higher volatility and a higher risk associated with that return. And then maybe I have a more stable portfolio that gets a 10% return.
Which is still
if
good,
I can
by the way. Like 10%
yeah, still good.
Solid.
But if I can consistently generate that 10% return and there's less fluctuation, then my portfolio is actually going to make more money over time, right? Think about this. So if I start with $100 and I make 10% the first year, now I have $110, and I make 10% the next year, now I have $121. My average return is 10% and I finished with $121 versus the other portfolio where the average return was 25% and I finished with the same amount of money that I started with.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's just like one example of if you're following finance content online, you might not understand the nuances that go behind that conversation and how you're not always trying to chase the highest return and it's not always going to lead to the best outcome for you.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, at least in the finance space, which is like, I've spent years studying it and then worked in it. I worked as a financial advisor and then in the operations side at Morgan Stanley for a couple of years. So like, I've been in it. A lot of people, when it comes to diversification, they think, oh, this is how I protect myself and like, this is how I get stable returns, which is true. But then they also expect to have like a big win, which is not what happens when you're diversified. A big win requires a big risk. Like the only reason that Elon Musk is a multi-billionaire is because he has focused so intensely on one thing at a time and then one thing at a time after that. Like if he were building how many, I think you need like 30, I don't remember the numbers, like 30 different stocks to be considered a well-diversified portfolio. And ideally I guess just starting to be diversified. A well-diversified portfolio would include hundreds of stocks. If he were building hundreds of businesses at the same time, none of them likely would have become billion-dollar companies, trillion-dollar companies. And so I've seen people in my personal life and in practice where people are like, oh, I'm diversified here, but like, why am I not getting 30% returns? Like they're kind of projecting these expectations. Like, dude, you are not going to see that. Like you're going to see stable returns, stable appreciation of your portfolio and dividends over the long run. But diversification will not get you a big win, a big payout very quickly. Over the long run, it is the right choice for most people. And for most people's money. It's my personal opinion that, you could take big swings with smaller portions of your portfolio or smaller portions of your money, but most of it should be diversified and kept safe.
Yeah, and here's my personal philosophy on that, right? Because obviously I want to make more money too. So
right, yeah, we all want to get rich, right?
How do I think about that? There's a certain baseline that I want to establish, right? A certain type of lifestyle I want to have with my family into the future. I want to provide me and my wife and kids with a certain level of financial security. Mm-hmm. So when I think about my baseline, I want something that's going to be well diversified. I'm not trying to take a huge risk on the first $2 million of my investment portfolio. I'm not saying $2 million right now in my late 20s, but how much that could grow to by the time I retire.
Sure.
So it's like, okay, if I know the portion of my portfolio now that will be covering my baseline in retirement, I want to capture that upside, but I want it to be diversified. I want, guaranteed 8 to 12% on that. Mm-hmm. Anything above that baseline is where I want to be taking my concentrated risks. Mm. And so, the way I think about that is like, okay, I know that my bases are going to be covered, that my family will always at least be comfortable. We'll have food on the table, roof over our head, everything like that. Beyond that, my wife doesn't care. She loves me. She trusts me. I love and trust her. And like, why not shoot for the moon? So, if we could build $20 million of wealth for ourselves by taking a concentrated risk, that's awesome. And if it doesn't pan out and we end up with 2 or 3 million instead, I'm not going to be crying tears over that.
Yeah. Yeah. You're worth 2 or 3 million of assets instead of 5 or 6, like still going to be fine. Like in my personal life, I've seen that my father-in-law is now recently retired and he spent his entire career as an electrical engineer in the aerospace and defense industry, which means that he has bias towards that industry. He has, we've gone over his finances several times, but he has several well-diversified portfolios of varying amounts, to which I'm obviously not going to disclose. But with some of his money, he has a personal affinity to, he has his needs met through the other portfolios. He has a personal affinity towards the aerospace and defense industry. So what he does is, that's going to be my concentrated risk. And luckily, that industry is subsidized by the American industrial complex. So it's done great for him. But, I think to your point, like as long as you can tell that your needs will be met by what this will grow into in the future, then I think it's totally fine. And I would say encouraged even to take those bigger swings with the rest of your money or however much you're comfortable with beyond that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's fun too.
That's actually one of the biggest changes to my, financial mindset. Early, we talked about how I grew up in a W-2 household.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't until I started walking in those circles, so to speak, of entrepreneurs and business owners and real estate investors that I realized every single one of them built wealth by taking some sort of concentrated bet.
Mm.
But it's not a blind risk for them. It's a calculated risk.
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually a calculated risk in their core skill set, like the industry they're most familiar with. That's where they're taking their big swings.
Mm-hmm.
If your whole career is in real estate, why on earth would you take a concentrated bet in cryptocurrency?
Right.
No, go take your concentrated bet in real estate. That's what you know best. That's where you understand how you're going to generate alpha, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Right. And alpha, can you define alpha for my mom who may be listening?
Yeah.
Is a nurse.
Yeah. So alpha is basically outsized returns because of some sort of arbitrage opportunity you identify or your unique value that you're bringing to the table.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you. And so we're getting close to our allotted time for this episode. I've got just a couple more questions that I wanted to ask you. So real quick, you've spoken to, I don't know how many millionaires, but lots of folks who have become financially successful. What would you say has been the most common path of becoming a millionaire? You've mentioned three common paths, the three main paths, but which of the three would you say has been the most common that you've seen?
The most common in America is working a corporate job and investing in the stock market, your 401k plan, etc. That's not the most common that I've seen, just because I tend to talk to more entrepreneurs and business owners. The most common path that I've seen is, funny enough, it's probably people that started with, or how would I phrase this? The most common path I've seen is generational wealth, not in the sense that someone inherits a trust fund, but in the sense that their father was a business owner that taught them the skills of business, and then they went and applied that to their own venture and created wealth doing that.
Yeah.
And so where's the common trend there, and how can you help yourself even if you didn't, have a financial mentor earlier in your life? Every single millionaire that I talk to, every single multimillionaire that I talk to, every successful business owner is financially literate. They know the language of money, whether they learned that from, their parents or a mentor, or because they have a degree in finance. It doesn't matter where you learn it from, but you have to know the language of money. You have to understand how investing works. And if you don't, you'll never get there unless it's blind luck and you're Forrest Gump thinking you're investing in a fruit company called Apple.
Yeah, I don't remember who said it. Maybe it was Warren Buffett. I'll say it was Warren Buffett. I'll make this up for him. But with compound interest, you're either paying it or you're being paid it. And your financial literacy will determine that. And also your ability to take action. But if you never have the literacy, then you won't really take action on that. So follow up to most common path of becoming a millionaire. What would you say, what is the fastest way that you've seen someone become a millionaire?
I've talked to a few people that really stand out in my mind. So on my podcast, I interviewed Chris Kerner, and he shared this crazy story where one of his skills is identifying arbitrage opportunity.
Yeah.
Right. And so there was this, it was early in the years of cryptocurrency, and there was some new regulation that were imposing sanctions on crypto mining. So basically, crypto mining is like, you picture like this huge database where they're trying to solve the algorithm to generate new Bitcoins, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a very dumbed down version of how crypto mining works.
Sure.
So he saw this opportunity where, I want to make sure I don't get this story wrong because it's been a while since I talked to him, but crypto mining was becoming more restrictive in China, which is where a lot of the mining was happening.
Mm-hmm.
And so they had to bring it to, I don't want to get the story backwards. I can't remember if they brought it from China to the United States or from the United States to China. So let me just think about how I can say this without accidentally saying it backwards.
Yeah.
Basically, he saw an arbitrage opportunity here with crypto mining where some new sanctions had changed the rules of the game. And so he bought a crypto mining facility and started renting out the machines to people.
Mm.
And in the first 3 months of business, all through organic marketing efforts on Facebook Marketplace of all places, he generated $9.8 million in 3 months on a 17% profit margin. So you do the math, that's about $2 million in 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to our idea of taking concentrated risks, this was definitely one of those big bets. It was a concentrated risk. He saw the opportunity because it was an industry he was familiar with. He took it, and it was literally just printing money.
Mm-hmm. That is, short of owning the Federal Reserve's money printer, that is maybe the closest thing to printing money.
Yeah.
For him. And I think that, just like you said, that goes back to, if you would like to, there's plenty of proven paths to become a millionaire, but it takes time, right? There's this relationship dynamic between your starting investment, the risk you're willing to take on, and the amount of time that you're willing to take to hit that $1 million mark. I don't think you said how much he spent on acquiring this company. And it doesn't really matter. We're not doing the math right here, but he spent some money to acquire the Bitcoin mining equipment, the company, and all that. His risk was pretty high because he was going all in on a company, not like a portfolio of anything, just one company in a very niche industry with changing regulations. So lots of risk and volatility in that environment. But his time window was shortened because of that, because it worked out. Because it was a large investment over a short amount of time with high risk. He was able to achieve that so quickly, which is completely different from, like my father-in-law, like your father, who over a long period of time just consistently invested in the company's 401k and now are, plenty wealthy and taken care of. You can either do it quickly, but that could have gone to zero, right? Like, what if regulations changed in the United States and that investment would have gone to nothing? Again, I don't know how much he put in right away, but let's say, $100,000 to buy that business.
I want to say it was about 300,000 actually.
So 300,000. That could have become worthless, just like selling computers for parts, just getting a little bit of salvage value there. So super high risk. And I think that's something that a lot of people aren't willing to take on. And like you said, like the narrative of hating on corporations and businesses and employers, like that is the safe option. Like most people probably should not risk 300,000 to go and acquire a business in a highly regulated, with changing regulations, like sort of environment. It's not the solution for most people, but it can work out for like the exceptional few.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said.
So last question here for you. You've spoken to successful people with goals who are maybe not as successful as they would like to be yet. As a coach, you tackle a lot of emotional, psychological issues or just things to be worked on with your clients. What's one thing that money does not solve?
Ooh. Money doesn't solve the degree of happiness that you have in your life.
Mm.
And it's interesting, they've done different studies that most people have a baseline level of happiness.
Mm-hmm.
And we have different events in our life that cause us to fluctuate from the baseline.
Sure.
right? So if you get a surprise bonus at work for $10,000, of course you're going to feel really happy about that.
Yeah, it's a good day.
But after that initial high wears off, you usually return to your baseline.
Right.
Same thing if you have a really negative event, right? You get in a car crash and whatever, you're going to be upset, but then eventually you return back to your baseline.
Mm-hmm.
Money can make your life easier. It can make your life more comfortable, but it isn't going to change your baseline level of happiness unless you spend it the right way. And usually that involves working through the emotional side of finances. If you can spend your money to create higher quality relationships, if you can spend your money to give back, whether that's through your church or causes that you care about, those are the financial decisions that will raise your baseline level of happiness.
Yeah.
And so money doesn't solve the issue because it's something that you have to address personally, but you can use the financial resources that you have to create an environment that fosters that growth and sense of personal satisfaction.
Well said. Yeah, I think that I've seen people get money. I've seen people lose money. We all kind of just return to our baseline happiness. And I've seen money be spent unwisely by myself and others. But I feel like money allows for freedom, but freedom does not make you happy unless you take advantage of that freedom. You know?
Yeah.
My 2 cents anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Jackson, thank you so much for your time. I know you've got a client to get to, which is exciting. I'm glad your business is doing well and you're helping people out. And if people would like to speak more with you or hear more from you, where can they find you? What's the best place?
Yeah, you can check me out on my podcast, Money with Jackson. It's on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and go listen to some of the interviews we were talking about today. I interview 7, 8, 9-figure business owners, millionaires, multimillionaires, and it's really tactical on how they approach their own financial decisions, how they invest their money. Totally free resource that would be a great place to start.
Perfect. Anywhere else? I'll link that in the description here. Anywhere else they can find you?
Yeah, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, Jackson Larimer on LinkedIn. I also have a weekly personal finance newsletter that I write that I can send you the link for the description as well. You can go to my website, jacksonlarimer.com. So there's a few different places to find me, but I would say go check out Money with Jackson, because if you're listening to a podcast today, that's probably going to be the easiest place to start.
Cool. We'll link that one first and send me the whole press kit. We'll get it all in the description.
Sounds good. Thanks, Matt.
Okay. Thank you, Jackson.